Back to the podcast. Ryan Scheckel, who's the Assistant Director of Pre-Professional Health Careers at Texas Tech University. Longtime listeners will remember Ryan has appeared on the podcast before, and now for his third interview. And his first interview was on our very first podcast episode. So Ryan's first interview discussed his presentation at the 2019 NACADA Annual Conference, the Academic Advising Approaches book, and also a little bit about pop culture. In Ryan's second interview, we chatted about his background in higher ed, being the Assistant Director at Texas Tech, the history of Texas Tech's mascot, more about presentations, more about pop culture, and his time at the 2020 virtual NACADA conference. All this was from episode 22 of the podcast. Now we have Ryan back to chat with some more. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Matt. It's good to see you again in a way that is becoming far too familiar. I enjoyed seeing everybody as well in person in Cincinnati.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was just great being back to seeing people after 2 years. It wasn't as awkward as I thought it was going to be, but I thought, I had a great time. And it's been almost a year since we've had a podcast interview with you. So what's new with you? What's new at Texas Tech University?
Well, we have been on campus as an advising office since August of 2020. But this fall semester was sort of our institution's return to fully in-person offerings. I know I haven't done the research on it, but I know that we still have more virtual and hybrid modality options than I think would be considered normal, pre-pandemic normal. But as far as percentages go, the vast majority of on-campus housing, on-campus programming is all returning to what people are thinking of as normals. And so that's been interesting. The energy definitely feels different than last fall semester. We've met with students. I would still say probably at least half still virtually, but meeting with students in person is something we haven't done in a while, and we're doing that too, and sorting through how do we do that appropriately and safely. But it definitely feels. We had our first major on-campus recruiting event yesterday, and that type of energy is something that we haven't had in a long time. And coming off of a fantastic conference and stuff, returning to a big on-campus event, it's still not normal, but there's definitely a lot more energy and effort in that in-person space.
How was your energy coming from being at the conference, presenting, and then flying back, and then going right into presentations for students?
Well, I have to say, I know for so many folks that travel was disrupted significantly Saturday and Sunday, and I was fortunate that was not the case for me. I was definitely tired. I remember sleeping a lot Saturday night and into Sunday morning. And then we went and did some stuff, and got lunch and had some time with the family, came back to settle in for a little bit of a moment of time in between things, and falling asleep on the couch. And it had nothing to do with the game that I was watching, but I'm still tired. So not only did we have a recruiting event Monday, yesterday morning, but then that was like 8 to noon. But then also my class that I teach is Monday afternoons. And I was sitting on like the little stage that is in the room that I teach in. And normally when I start class, as people are filtering in and logging in top hat and taking attendance that way, I usually stand. But I was not about standing. So there's a chair, and I was sitting in the chair, and one of the students came in, and he was looking around like he wasn't sure if he was in the right place. And so I just asked him, I was like, "Do you think you're in the wrong place?" And he's like, "Well, it's Monday, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, and it's 2:00. This is seminar in health professions." And he goes, "Okay." I was like, "Is it weird because I'm sitting down?" And he's like, "Maybe." So I was like, I was just too tired. I almost taught class sitting down, but I have a hard time lecturing sitting. So I eventually did, but I was home early yesterday, and I was in bed early yesterday, and recovering from a fantastic time for sure.
Yeah, don't get me started on travel and flight cancellations. That was me over the weekend, but we're back at it.
Right.
Talk about your class again, because what class are you teaching, and how's that going this semester?
So when I took my position as assistant director for pre-health advising, the former director was teaching a seminar in health professions class. And the idea is for pre-health students, let's introduce them to the range of roles and professions and fields and perspectives in actual professional schools, medical schools, pharmacy schools, and so on. Interprofessionalism is a big part of their curricular model. And so there's a benefit to the pre-health student to understand their own professions, of course, but also how their profession will interact with, relate to, and benefit from other professional fields. So there's multiple learning outcomes for the course, but one of them is understanding interprofessionalism. Another is understanding how to be a strong applicant for professional school. And ultimately, I've added to really understand themselves, which those go hand in hand. So we're currently in a phase of the course, the middle third, where we're talking about self-assessments and developing a vocabulary and sense of self. So it's learning about your profession, learning about yourself, and learning about healthcare in general. Previously, the way the course was taught was that we'd have speakers from sort of each of the professional fields each week. And they'd be there live, they'd do their talk. I would try to influence those lectures as much as I could to really personalize the speaker and tell their story and how they became a healthcare professional and not just recruit for their programs. And this year, it's not that I don't appreciate those speakers' time and energy, but where it's scheduled during the day, it's not particularly convenient for them. And I was really looking to make the course a little bit more of something that I was contributing as instructor and not just scheduling speakers. So I have all those lectures from previous semesters recorded. And so I was like, I'm going to flip the class. So on Blackboard, that's our learning management system. I'll post the lecture the Tuesday after we meet for the next week. They watch the lecture, they take a quiz, they have a forum discussion post where they respond to other people and to my prompt. And then I give a lecture that sort of wraps it up and encapsulates usually 3 or 4 main points from the recorded lecture. And usually they're about similar topics built around our elements of competitive and compelling, things like understanding your profession, understanding your sense of passion, information literacy, and those sorts of things. So I've changed the way the course is taught, which means I have to work a lot harder this semester. But it's been really good for me. I've mentioned multiple times in my sort of summary lectures at the end of the week that hearing the lectures again and listening for that content or reading that content in a new way for a new purpose has really broadened and deepened my understanding of the course and how we try to reach those outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, a lot more work on you, but a lot of benefit to the student, though, and utilizing what you already have. So the recordings with the speakers, flipping that approach, and then adapting your class based off the time of day it is. So I think that's really awesome. Now, we were talking earlier about travel. Prior to that, the conference. So just recently, NACADA had their 2021 annual conference, both a virtual component, but both of us got to attend in person after 2 years. Any takeaways for you now that you kind of get a little bit of time to reflect back on last week?
People talk about the pandemic and the ways that it's disrupted our thinking, the opportunities to, rethink how we share content or how we interact with our stakeholders. Typically, when we talk about those things, and understandably, our actual day jobs, what we're paid to do, that's usually the perspective that I take. I've been asked multiple times, what thing did you do or what strategy did you use during the pandemic that you think will persist, that you'll retain or whatever. But I will say that for the purpose of the conference and takeaways is because it was hybrid and because there were on-demand and recorded sessions recorded live there, that the conference isn't really over. We're not attending live or synchronous things anymore, but we have asynchronous access to this content, things that I wasn't able to attend because I was attending something else I wanted to attend. And so I think, I don't know if it will persist, if we'll continue to record on-demand versions of our sessions in advance of in-person conferences. But that's kind of an interesting idea. As I was traveling on my way back, I was thinking about the sessions that were either recorded in advance of the conference or recorded live that I wanted to watch or maybe even watch again, which is something that's never happened before. It didn't really change the way I approached attending the conference. It's not like I was like making choices about which one is recorded and which one isn't. I went to the sessions I wanted to go to most, but I realized I have an opportunity post conference to stretch the conference out in content. Previously, I'd made the pitch that the best thing to do or the best takeaway from a conference is that you don't have to end the conferencing, the interaction with colleagues. And now the content doesn't have to end either. That's sort of interesting. I would say that the biggest shift or change to how I approach the conference in person, though, was the fantastic and amazing development of the scholarly papers session. Obviously, being a part of that, as sort of like the task force or work group that was getting that from idea to realization. I already knew about it, but I would say as an attendee, that's definitely a session type and an approach to being at a conference that was brand new and fascinating and really beneficial to me as an attendee.
Do you happen to know if those sessions were recorded, the scholarly paper sessions?
They were not. And I'll say that if certainly I don't speak for everybody on the group, but I don't think that they would disagree that just the work of getting those sessions to happen was for the first time ever for NACADA and under the format and structure of having two papers with a discussant after the authors reviewed their papers and their research and then doing Q&A. There were enough moving parts as it was for the first time around. And because also those the purpose of scholarly paper sessions is to, in part, help authors develop their papers as they lead to publication. There's some interest in keeping those still somewhat protected as far as the content and the information. Not that, and I sincerely mean this for anyone who has presented a non-scholarly paper session, which has been the dominant and continues to be the dominant session type, can't publish or isn't thinking about those things. But that is very much the intent behind a scholarly paper session type, is to develop those papers for publication. So besides trying to pull it off for the first time in the format that we're pulling off, and also wanting to make sure that we're being careful and cognizant of and conscientious about our authors and their research at this point, there wasn't any recorded. There was the possibility that papers would be uploaded to the app. And so there may be some of those sessions types where the papers are uploaded. But any of the scholarly paper sessions that I was in, other than the one I moderated, I also live tweeted those. So you can go look for any of those threads from those scholarly paper sessions if you want to get a peek into what they're like.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of like misconceptions with writing and doing scholarly, turning, like, let's say, a presentation into potentially into some type of article or publication. I know Dr. Wendy Troxel always says, record your presentations, and that's literally like your first draft of an article. But I think a lot of people think, oh, that's not me. That's not something I can do. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, certainly. There are times when people talk to me about sort of my presence in this space, not just this podcast space, but the academic advising space, NACADA, and that kind of stuff. And they assume, I think, maybe it's because of the way I talk about things or my presentations, that's just comes naturally to me. It certainly doesn't. I don't know if it's because my background is in education and I was first ever thought about ideas and content from how I would relay it to students or to learners. But I think around outlines and lesson plans and ultimately presentations. That's the first way that my brain creates something that I'm going to share with other people. I share a lot of ideas that are far less formed. But if I think about something formalizing, my first place that I think about it formalizing is in a presentation or an instructional mode. And I also, because I tested well, never took a college writing course. And so when I had assignments, in graduate school or in, junior, senior level coursework in my undergrad, my papers, they were fine. It wasn't like I was a fantastic writer, certainly wasn't recognized for the strength or proficiency of my writing. And so getting to the point of I've got an idea, I can see a presentation in it, and then I'm going to translate it to a written product. Those are steps that not only are there my own personal development and issues that are in the way, but there's also work and life and finding the time to do those things, and also the skills. So I think, yes, there are some folks for whom writing will come naturally, and there are some folks for whom writing will be their first product. And that's fantastic. If that comes naturally to you, you're going to find the opportunities a little bit more accessible. But I will say, as someone who's been advising for now nearly 20 years and presenting since 2003 at annual conferences, my first published piece was something that you and I did together after last year's virtual annual conference. So it's doable. It just means that there may be some time and development. Part of that was signing up for a NACADA writing group. And that was really helpful to go into a space where other people had similar goals and interests, but were also looking for support and help. And so finding collaborators, finding support, and seeing the possibility, but also leveraging technologies. I know that a lot of the stuff that you and I worked on and are continuing to work on came from an actual recording, a transcription using otter.ai. Eventually I need to get some sort of sponsorship from them. But a way of getting the words from our mouths to the screen or to the paper, so to speak. It may not come naturally, but there are lots of ways that you can start to build that proficiency. And reviewing as well. I'm a reviewer for the NACADA Review. I've reviewed for a Frontiers in Education publication, certainly reviewed plenty of conference proposals. I think I'm now beginning to understand what writing looks like in different settings and different opportunities to publish.
Yeah, and also it's a process. So I know society nowadays, you want everything done like absolutely right then and there, get it done within a day or however long. But it's something that is going to be, you have a starting point, and that end might be weeks away, months away, year away, but you keep working at it and you'll get it done. But I do want to jump into the Cincinnati conference, because not only did you present, but one of the things that, as of the Cincinnati conference, you are now the new chair of the Theory, Philosophy, and History of Advising community through NACADA. So first, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And aside from the title of the advising community, listeners may want to know, they wanted to know about the various types of advising communities within NACADA. So I think this will be a great opportunity to talk about this one. How would you describe the Theory, Philosophy, and History of Advising community?
Well, so when I was an advisor in our School of Art and was the only advisor in my building, the only person doing the job that I did in my academic unit, I was really starting to sort through, is this a long-term profession? I had taught for a couple of years. I'd been in advising for a while. I'd changed roles in advising, and I was like, what am I getting? What is this profession doing to satisfy my values and my passions and my interests? Certainly, I really enjoy the interaction with students in an educational setting. Definitely enjoy the campus culture and all that stuff. But I was like, long term, what does a career in advising look like? And up until that point, like I said, my first annual conference was 2003. I co-presented a pre-conference session and then 2 concurrent sessions. I didn't know any better. So I was involved in the association, but I wasn't doing things like attending the town hall business meeting. I wasn't going to advising communities at the time. They were called commissions and interest groups. I was attending sessions, learning things, and then sort of finding the people I came to the conference with. So in 2013, I decided, you know what, I'm going to do more. This is a very armchair, amateur sort of maybe perhaps misunderstanding of the year of yes concept. But I was like, I'm just going to say yes to things. I'm just going to say yes to possibilities and be open to it. And so I attended my first Theory, Philosophy, and History commission meeting at that annual conference. And I was like, oh, they're talking about the ideas that I'm interested in. It's not that there aren't other advising communities that I'm a member of or that I find interesting, and we certainly can talk about that later. But Theory, Philosophy, and History, sitting in that meeting and listening to the things that they were talking about, I was definitely thinking, these are the folks I want to get to know. These are the conversations I want to have. They're conversations that are ultimately idea based in a lot of ways. It's not that they don't then translate to practice, but the philosophies that inform how we can practice and do the work or approach the work that we're doing, the theories that then inform our strategies and our approaches, and our histories. In particular, I did a post-bac certification in history, and I really love to get to the root of things. So sort of where did this begin? What was its origins? And then sort of understand its evolution and change. And so those are the topics that theory, philosophy, and history of advising community tends to bring into that space. I mean, a lot of that is represented in scholarly publication or presentations of that nature. But a lot of times, developments and changes and things that are happening in higher education and in our society and our world around them are very relevant to the conversations that we're having. Like I said, those deeper, meaningful conversations. And it's not that practice and strategy and approach isn't deep or meaningful to people. It's just what I was looking for and needing to connect with. And it was in that advising community where I found it. So, because I was saying yes to things and the opportunity has presented itself to be a steering committee member, I was like, yeah, let's do that. And so, for since 2014, I've been on the steering committee for the theory, philosophy, and history of advising community, and seeing other people lead in that space was really helpful to get a sense of what does contribution look like. It doesn't necessarily have to be those sort of standard models. It can be more relational. It can be more aspirational, and those were things that were always interesting to me as well. So our community, just as the name says, talks about those things, tries to find where people are having purposeful and interesting interactions around those topics, and then also is doing everything we can to encourage members in all the advising communities to understand the theories, philosophies, and histories and inform those perspectives as well.
And for you as chair, it's a 2-year commitment?
It is, yeah. And what's weird is on the front end, when thinking about nomination, thinking about accepting a nomination, thinking about the running, and I was thrilled to have someone else to run against. Me personally, I think that running unopposed, when it comes to organizational health, if elections and some level of competition in the marketplace of ideas is part of what your organization does, if you're running unopposed, that there's in some ways, not that anyone who ran unopposed is not legitimate in their leadership role, but there's somehow a loss there. And so Aaron Donahoe Rankin was who ran against me, and that was fantastic. We had a meet the candidates meeting where other people could hear our perspectives and our platforms, what we're going to do. But all of that on that front end made the 2 years seem significant. And not that it's not, but going to the conference and conducting the business meeting, our outgoing chair, CJ Venable, wasn't able to attend. And so I was conducting that meeting. We did include them, though, by Zoom in the meeting, and put the microphone down on my laptop camera or speaker, and we made it work. But actually conducting that business meeting for the first time, I was like, this is going to go so fast. This is going to fly by. Once you start thinking about, okay, we're going to plan quarterly meetings for the steering committee members, and we're going to have quarterly either Zoom or some other type of content available, ideally partnered with other advising communities. And then we're going to have sort of the natural rhythm of conference proposals, or proposal reading and reviewing, and then selection, and then an annual conference. You already realize how fast your first year is going to go. And so I'm excited about the opportunity, and I'm anxious to make sure that we make the most of it, of these 2 years, and that I'm also anxious to make sure I honor the responsibility that a chair position provides me. It's going to go fast.
Yeah, and I know you just started in the position, but any thoughts so far, and any goals you want to accomplish maybe within this year?
Yeah, I one of the things it's important to note is being on the steering committee, I've seen multiple chairs, and everyone has had their own approach to leading this community. But given the tight window of chairs, tenures, I decided that I didn't necessarily want to set my own priorities. We have we have a lot of fantastic folks, big thinkers and strategic thinkers, and creative thinkers, and critical thinkers. And so I wanted to harness that opportunity and the resources available. And so we started our business meeting in Cincinnati in person, but we'll conclude it virtually on November 11th. And I was just asking, based on my background in organizational theory, that we identify 3 priorities for this year, and that we organize ourselves around those priorities. So some came out during conversation. Definitely the role of history. We're at a unique place as an association that so many of the people who've been influential and critical in the development of academic advising and the association are here and happy and willing and excited to share their perspectives in the history and growth of academic advising and the association. And so that focus on history definitely sounds like it will be one of our priorities. The other thing that I was thinking about as a priority is that there are voices that are going unheard in theory, philosophy, and history, whether they're underserved populations, underrepresented populations, marginalized populations, or they're people in the association who feel like they have an interest, but that couldn't be them because they haven't done things, they're too new, or they focus on one thing for too long or whatever. So trying to find a way to broaden access to theory, philosophy, and history as a conceptual base. But that's only 2. That's only 2 priorities that I could say we've begun to identify. And so our goal for our November 11th conclusion of our meeting is to let's finalize our priorities. Let's get some work groups established. Steering committee members will be a part of leading those groups, but so will members of the advising community. And I'd really like to produce some tangible results in each of those priority areas.
And how does one join if they're interested, whether it's this advising community or any NACADA advising community?
Right. So when you log into the NACADA website, if you're a member, there will be a tab that says My Communities in your sort of member profile. And you can edit and review those. The association allows people to select 4 advising communities, and so you can add theory, philosophy, and history, and then 3 others. And then and because you'll have that sort of tag on your member account, when official communication goes out through the association about a specific advising community, you'll be included in that communication. On our community page, though, there is also a listserv. And the instructions are on that page how to join the listserv. I think everyone has feelings about listservs. I think for the theory, philosophy, and history of advising community, making the listserv be relevant is really our biggest concern. As a communication channel, I think there are times when we have energy in that channel, and there are times when we don't. But I can conclusively say I have never said that the listserv for theory, philosophy, and history has been a distraction or a problem. If anything, I'd like to see a little bit more activity there. So signing up for our listserv is not going to spam your inbox with tons of pointless emails where we're debating Foucault or something like that, which is a philosopher, for those who don't know. But it's another way to connect with us. We're finally also on Facebook. The Advising Philosopher is a Facebook group that our community created a while back as another way of engaging with members.
Maybe it'll be on TikTok next. I don't know.
I'll say this. There are some members, and they know who they are, of our advising community who absolutely need to do some TikTok dance videos for us. So.
Now, I assume that with the chairing this advising community, that's one of yours. That's on your membership. Do you mind sharing what the other ones that you're a part of?
Sure. So since we advise health profession students, I've been a part of the health professions advising community since 2015. When I joined here, I updated my community membership. That community also has a sort of a reciprocal or a related connection with the NAAHP, the National Association of Advisors for Health Professions. And so those two communities sort of feel like they're cousins in ways, that the advising community and NAAHP. But then I'm also, as an administrator, looking for another gap in my personality to be filled, and that's my lack of proficiency in assessment. So I've been a part of the assessment advising community. And then also because I lead a team of 5 pre-health advisors, primary role staff advisors, advisor training and development has been a community that I've been a part of, and really appreciate the leadership of Gavin Farber in that role. Excited to see what's going to be developing in in advisor training and development in the coming years after that really rich period of Gavin's chair.
And maybe you'll know where I'm going to go with this, but with the advisor training and development, anything interesting that is coming out of that community?
Well, I know that the advisor training and development book publication from NACADA, the second edition, was reaching sort of that natural period in time where they're reviewing it and seeing what needs to be updated. And so I was really excited to have a proposal accepted to write a Voices of the Field portion for the theory chapter of that third edition. We've submitted our sort of peer reviewed, our content editor reviewed manuscripts to the copy editors. So we're moving into that next phase of the publication process, which is scary. It's the first time I've ever done anything like that, but it's really exciting. Again, going through that iterative process of turning in a proposal, being selected, and then sort of the edit and review process with our content editors. I learned a ton about my own writing and about writing for audiences. But then moving into copy editing, I'm like, oh, that's so formal and specific. So it's my understanding that third edition will be published in time for the 2022 annual conference in Portland. So be on the lookout for that.
Oh, that's exciting. And kind of going back to what I said, it's a process. It takes time, but like you're saying, you're enjoying kind of seeing a lot of this behind the scenes kind of thing and all that's involved in it.
Right. The work and the people who do the work. It's no small task. And if you ever read the acknowledgments portion of any book, they always talk about how much work goes into getting a book on the shelf. And that is no less true for these publications. The amount of attention and energy and effort that is poured into these important items in our literature, in our growing profession, being a small part of that and getting just a little bit of a glimpse, you really develop not only an appreciation for the people doing it, but then, I look at my bookshelf and I see how many I've got stacked up behind me right there, and just the amount of work that goes into that. You develop a different perspective of it, I guess, and certainly how real it is for the people involved in it, and it becomes more personal.
Yeah, and if you're not watching us on YouTube and you're listening to the podcast, the audio version, he's got a stack of books, and I think The Power Story from Peter Hagen's probably the top one there.
There's definitely no ranking. I'll say that. They just
it's the one that's on top of the rest of the books.
Right. And then academic advising approaches, the new advisor guidebook, the master advisor text, that sort of trilogy. That's the whole thing that kicked off my crazy Star Wars thing, actually, was that they were releasing a trilogy of books. And I was like, I know trilogies because I know Star Wars.
So if you want Ryan to buy any of your books, if you're selling them, have a trilogy. He will be the first in line.
I'll be there.
So you did a couple presentations as well at the conference. So the one I want to talk to you about with the time we have left is not the narrative one that we did. Now we can always talk about that at a different time.
You know plenty about that.
But you did one on, tell me, so you did communities of practice, how they wither and die, and what to do about it. Tell me about this presentation.
Sure. For those who know me, I've said multiple times, one of my favorite things to do is subvert expectation. The dominant narrative is always something that I think should be problematized and queried and thought critically about. And even in your own life, right? We develop themes and we become known for something. And certainly I felt like, anyway, that people who knew of my presentations from previous conferences knew that they were fun, knew that they were pop culture, knew that they would be entertaining in ways. And so when I was developing this presentation, largely it came from one article. It came from something that wasn't even the focus of the article about communities of practice. There was an article from Cox in 2005, I believe, where he was reviewing sort of the status of the idea of communities of practice and how they've been adopted in other disciplines. So it was a literature review, looking at 4 significant publications on communities of practice, and just summarizing what you would find in the literature. And there was one column, 75% of one column on one page of this article, that had 8 items that, drawing off of someone else's work, and the application of communities of practice in healthcare, that there were things about the nature of 21st century work that undermined the development of communities of practice. And as I was reading the 8 things, I was like, every one of those sounds like academic advising, not just during the pandemic, but especially during the pandemic. So that was the genesis of, I marked it up and I wrote like a bracket and I said, presentation. I was like, right here, these 8 points, this is a presentation. And then, I continued to move on to understanding what communities of practice are. It's an idea of, it's a group of people that share an interest and a common task, in a thing that they do, typically the work that they do. And that through their regular interaction, they're seeking to improve how they do that work or that task that they share together. And we've seen a couple of people in advising literature and scholarship cite communities of practice as something of value for academic advising. And so I was like, well, I hear about it. And every time I've ever talked to somebody about communities of practice, they're like, oh yeah, Levin Wenger, like it's good stuff. And I was like, I don't know anything about it. So that's how I started. I went down that rabbit hole. I was like, where did it start? What does it mean? I ran into those 8 things that undermine it. And that's how that presentation began. The Western New York Advising Conference went entirely virtual last year. John Sauter is a good friend of mine, and they were looking for conference proposals. And I was like, let's do it. It's coming up. It's going to force me to get those ideas out into something that I can do, which is a presentation, as we've discussed. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to take a completely different tone. I'm going to take a tone that is in ways shocking. And that's how, in my crazy brain, the title came up of how communities of practice don't flourish. Because if academic advising work tends to be in the characteristics or in the structure of these 8 things that work against communities of practice, then if we're going to adopt a communities of practice concept, whether in our scholarship or in our practice, we should know about them. We should anticipate them. Instead of sitting back and going, why aren't our communities of practice really taking root and flourishing? We can say, oh, well, there's some things about the nature of advising work that are working against our interests. And that was the idea behind it. I think I was fun. But we did in the presentation, collect some data and see if everyone else felt like these were also characteristics of academic advising.
Yeah. Now, at least in the recorded one that I watched, you had mentioned that when you started advising that, you were in a centralized advising office, and that actually had a big influence on your conception of communities of practice and your approach to academic advising. What was it about having that centralized approach that had that impact for you?
Well, so in the origins of the concept of communities of practice is something called legitimate peripheral participation. Sometimes that looks like mentoring. Sometimes that looks like apprenticeship. Sometimes it just looks like I'm learning on the job alongside others who are proficient. And when I came into the what is now called Explore, the Exploratory Undecided Advising Office in 2002, there were others who were already doing that work who were proficient, and I was new to it. And in having colleagues who I could sometimes inadvertently overhear through our cubicles, and sometimes actually shadow and sometimes have meaningful conversations about like that, I didn't know any better. Just like presenting at annual conferences, I didn't know any better. I didn't know any better that there were, I was aware that there were advisors who weren't in centralized offices or were in advising offices where they were the only advisor. But I grew up, I learned to think of myself as somebody who was in a community of practice. I didn't have that language at that time, but I knew that I could ask somebody for something. I knew I could learn from them. I knew that I could develop around our centralized shared task an identity that says, yes, this is me. This is my work. It's not the job that I do. It's who I am. And fundamentally, if a community of practice is going to flourish and develop, the individuals have to conceive of their shared task as fundamental to their identities, as opposed to the thing that pays the bills. And I know that there are times when we need the thing to pay the bills, But I think if we're going to reach potential as a community of practice or as a professional community, at some point there has to be an aspirational element that says, yes, I'm adopting this as central to my identity. It's not necessary, but I think it is certainly part of becoming something more. So many of the other professions, I think if you spoke to members of those professional fields, separating the work they do from who they are is antithetical to their conception of self. And I'm all about work-life balance, and I understand that there's more to a person than the work that they do. But that relationship is central to the idea of community practice. And growing up or starting my professional journey in a centralized advising practice meant that when I moved out of it, I missed it. And when I moved out of it, as I was searching for it, I found it in a different community through the Theory, Philosophy, and History of Advising community and through NACADA.
Nice. And I wish we could talk more, but we've actually already reached time for this interview.
Just edit it down, Matt. Edit it down.
Oh, I wish. But I think another educational interview with Ryan Scheckel, a lot of tidbits that listeners can find in this interview. And Ryan, I always appreciate you being on, being so willing to be asked all these questions and talk about the great things that you're doing and moving advising forward. So, of course, if anyone has any questions that wants to connect, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
So my Twitter handle is at RDSCHECKEL. That's RD Scheckel. Of course, my email address at our institution's ryan.scheckel@ttu.edu, texastechuniversity.edu. Would love to chat always. It's one of the things that I don't know if we'll ever think differently about connecting with people via video chat anymore. But I would love to do that, or just email, or just on Twitter, whatever works best for y'all. I'm happy to have conversations, and I promise I won't talk as much as Matt did during this interview.
Ryan, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is so awesome. I love this. It's a great support for the advising communities and advisors out there. And I'm really interested to see who else is listening. So if you ever find out that there are folks outside the advising community who are accessing this content to understand what our profession is about, I think that there's some really fascinating things there.
Oh yeah, at the Cincinnati conference, I found a lot of people that listened to the podcast, which I was just amazed and looking forward to doing more of these. So Thanks again, Ryan.
Yeah.